It's the world this week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey, foreign editor for the Daily Beast. And we have here your latest opus, Our Man in Charleston, Britain's secret agent in the Civil War, which comes out...
comes out on July 21st.
July 21st. And it's the story of...
It's the story of a man, middle-level diplomat, who essentially was able to change the course of the Civil War by focusing on a few issues that were hugely important in London that a lot of people weren't paying attention to and that a lot of historians never paid any attention to.
All right, so an Englishman who may have changed the course of the Civil War. Also with us, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. Thank you for being with us again. How are you?
Happy to be here.
And we're also in the company of Ana Navarro-Pedro, Paris correspondent for the Newsweekly magazine Visao.
Hello.
And Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
Online at worldpoliticsreview.com.
All right. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Our hashtag F24Debate. We've seen many last chance summits when it comes to Greece, but none under the duress of banks being shut for 2 whole weeks. As Eurozone finance ministers crunched the numbers from Athens' reform proposals submitted late Thursday, and ahead of a Sunday EU summit, the focus now shifts away from a nation that needs fresh cash fast.
We are afraid, we're terrified, because we're waiting, there is no deal coming yet, we're hoping for a deal, some deal that at least will secure the position of Greece in the Eurozone.
We Greeks are confused. We definitely don't want to leave Europe. No Greek wants to leave Europe. However, all these measures have brought many people to their knees who are now saying, let's be done with this.
The new measures are suffocating. Better we live poor than to plunge into chaos.
Better we live poor than to plunge into chaos. Ana Navarro-Pedro, this Friday there's a rally taking place in Athens. Yesterday it was the pro-EU camp. Today it's the pro-no vote camp. Speaking of no votes, that referendum they held, it seemed like it was a century ago, but it was just last Sunday.
It was just last Sunday, and I don't see how a week after the referendum, the Prime Minister is going to push to his electors and to the people of Greece with the program-bearing measures that they voted against on Sunday. So I really don't see... We'll still have to wait and have the details, because maybe there is something concrete and not totally contradictory coming out of what's on the table. But I think the situation now, it's absolutely chaos. In Greece, as that lady said, you know, there is no money to pay for wages right now because banks are closed. Enterprises are leaving Greece, going across the border to Bulgaria, to Macedonia, to do business there, you know, exporting over the border or whatever. But what is the production is really going down because of these measures. What is on the table now apparently is going to demand small enterprise, small and, you know, what the French call PME, small business, to pay in advance for business taxes even before they've, you know, they have sold. So the situation is chaotic. It's and not understandable
what did you think?
for me.
We heard that woman talk about better to be poor than to sign on to something like that.
I can understand it because I don't see where they can extract more money from the Greeks, you know, from the...
And yet public opinion in Greece is against leaving the Eurozone.
Which is not contradictory. Why should they leave Eurozone? Who said they should leave Eurozone? That was the blackmail that was imposed upon them in order to say yes to the measures that they wanted to sell them. Remember, June 25, Tsipras was saying, we want to renegotiate the debt, and then we'll adopt an austerity measures accordingly to the new calendar. And Eurogroup said no. So he asked for a referendum. Now he's going for austerity measures before, you know, having a negotiating debt. So, I mean...
you think he's sold out?
I don't know yet.
We don't
I'm
know
waiting
yet.
to see.
And Elisabeth Moutet?
It's very common when you've not paid your debts to explain that the person to whom you owe money is a leech, a horrible person, a miser, is wrong, is crushing you, is unjust, etc. And that's exactly what they've been saying. But the truth is that we've bailed them out. Europe has bailed them out several times. And right now Europe is feeling that it's putting bad money after good and it's never going to be repaid. So I don't think there's any expectation in Europe that most of the debt will be repaid until 20 years from now in easy stages. But the idea that they can go on spending and without any kind of return means essentially it's become this Greek thing, the Danaids barrel. You keep on filling it and it keeps emptying because it's hollow. So there's no way that can work. It's all very well to be sentimental, but yes, you can get money out of Greece. There are plenty of places, Greeks who do not pay taxes. The ship owners and the church don't pay taxes. The church owns close to 20% of commercial real estate. I am not talking about monasteries in the mountains. I'm talking about parking lots in Athens and stuff like that. And people cheat. There's a quite remarkable book just out in America. You may have seen this, Christopher, which is by a former Wall Street Journal journalist who's Greek. And he explained all the scams that people have been doing for years, everybody knowing it. There's the story of the 200 swimming pools that are being declared in Athens, for instance, because you have a tax on swimming pools. When you look at Google Earth, you see 30,000 swimming pools, so there's a big difference. You see the island where you have 800 people who are registered blind and receive a pension, and there's one doctor in the Social Security clinic.
But
it's a country that has been cheating for decades. Europe does not trust it.
It's absolutely true what you say for most part of it. And yet, Greece is not living on foreign money, on borrowed money. Greece has a surplus on their primary budget. They make the money they need to live on. The rest of the money, the bailout, goes not into Greece, just goes through Greece. They don't see the color of the money going into the banks to pay for interest rates to the banks. And the money borrowed is, making the measure capital borrowed bigger, making it growing and growing. And it's never getting paid out because the money borrowed, it's only to pay for interest.
And another thing, interest rates are immoral.
I haven't finished. If you just allow me, I haven't finished. You said that very often when you owe money to someone, you're going to say that person is horrible in order not to pay. And it's perfectly true. Imagine Germany did that. Second World War was caused only in order not to pay the money they owed to the rest of Europe, and they didn't pay their debt again after the Second World War because it was forgiven, and they never paid their debts. But they have a moral stance of demanding that the other countries pay their debts to them.
Let me jump in.
Because when you get
when you get this sort of moral overlay on the debate, that's what essentially puts a lot of the people who are in the conference room negotiating the deal in a political bind, especially with their publics back home. The fact is that a lot of people in Germany feel the way that Anna-Elisabeth said. A lot of people in Greece feel the way that Anna said, and so the people who are negotiating have two things, two sort of constraints. One is this moral overlay, which complicates things, but the other is actually the numbers and the mechanics of the numbers. Historically, everyone knows that Greece will not pay back the full amount of its debt. There's not anyone who's involved in the negotiations who doesn't realize that. At the same time, politically, they needed to keep kicking the can down the road long enough to be able to do it at a time, for instance, when there was robust growth in Europe and people were a little less resentful of helping the Greeks out, or at a time when there weren't so much attention focused on it. And what Tsipras essentially did was to say, look, that's all very fine and good for Europe, but the Greek people are suffering too much to kick it down the road anymore. So let me just add one last thing. So what he essentially got from the whole referendum ploy, he didn't get necessarily better terms on austerity. In fact, he got worse terms on austerity. But what if his proposal is accepted in the state that it was presented? What he will have gotten is, for the first time since the haircut on the private sector debt, he will have gotten an explicit endorsement by the Eurogroup that there will be a debt restructuration negotiated. So the terms of that are not yet known. But it is linked to the bailout. And that's what he was trying to get, to say the Greeks are suffering too much. We can't just suffer indefinitely. You have to give us a light at the end of the tunnel so that we know when we come out of it. The moral aspects are maddening for the people negotiating it, because everyone knows the mechanics of the numbers.
Especially when the money, the bailout, doesn't go to pay for civil servants' salaries. It doesn't go to pay for retirement pensions. It goes straight to German, French, and other banks to pay for interest.
Well, a lot of that has been put on public books, a lot of that private debt now. But it is true that
that's another question.
At the center of it all is this issue of debt, and all sides agree that it's unsustainable. Germany's finance minister seemed to soften his tone Thursday ahead of the proposals, Wolfgang Schäuble acknowledging that Greece's debt is indeed unsustainable. However, he warned after talks with his French counterpart that he can't do much about it.
I'm afraid the IMF head is right to say that debt sustainability is not feasible without a haircut. But I also say that, and Michel Sapin can confirm this, I heard him saying it in a radio interview in Paris or somewhere today, the European treaties preclude haircuts of sovereign debt.
There you have it, Christopher Dickey. I'd love to do it, but I can't. It's not in the rules.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that going around, isn't there? I mean, I think that the fundamental problem here is that, remember how we used to talk about banks and institutions being too big to fail? Mm-hmm. Greece is too small to succeed. It's just not big enough to make a difference. And so it can be pushed around by Germany, can be pushed around by all the rest of Europe. Ultimately, especially the countries like France and Germany that are carrying a lot of Greek debt, they know they're going to take a huge haircut on this anyway. So they have to take a political stand, make sure that it's clear that they've done everything they can to screw this way, figuratively, the Greeks, to make sure that they're squeezing every last drop of money out to get their money back so they can then go to the voters at the end of the day and say, we had to take a haircut on this debt, whatever the European treaty says. What I imagine will happen is that at some point, they are just going to say, you're not going to get any more money. And we're going to dial this way back. You are able to support yourself. You're able to cover your running expenses. You can keep the country functioning. But we are not going to keep giving you money just to put it in the circle to keep giving back to our own banks. We can't keep doing that.
I agree with you, or I agree that that's one possibility. At the same time, when you look at, for instance, François Hollande and the kind of election that he will be facing in 2017, when you look at Angela Merkel, who is governing in a coalition, she's considered the strongest leader in Europe, but she doesn't win majorities. When you consider also the fact that the European Union and the Eurozone, it's pretty sure that they've built the infrastructure and the institutions and the mechanisms that were lacking in 2010 to contain any contagion. They're pretty sure, but they're not 100% sure. And once this sort of psychological panic starts unfolding, Italy could very easily go down. Spain could still go down. So
Portugal.
I think that
Portugal has a surplus.
Yeah,
as well,
Portugal's doing okay. So I think that in that sense, I think that certainly in the last 2 weeks we've seen a Grexit in everything but the final stamp on the document. So if it ever happens, this is what it will look like. Well, are we going to have to go through a round two? Or?
There's another contagion that's at play here. You talk about Hollande's election in 2017. Mm-hmm. He's going to be up against a very powerful candidate who's going to say, let's get out of the euro. Let's get out of Europe.
But at the same time,
in fact, she's going to be treated. She's going to be.
That's the head of the far-right National Front.
The problem that I'm trying to point to is that if Europe really is firewalled from the contagion, and they ease Greece out, fine, 2017 looks fine. But if not, if there is, for instance, a bank panic that spreads, it's hard. One last thing. For the last 5 years, Europe has been saying no one will leave the Eurozone. No one will leave the euro. And for the most part, markets agreed or believed it. It gets harder to convince people when you say, well, just one will leave the Eurozone, but no one else.
All right, and that brings us to the topic of France. For all of the Hollande bashing that we often see, could the president of this country be the unsung hero of an eventual deal discreetly sending technical advisors to Athens over the past few days to help the Greeks draw up their proposals for creditors. He also dispatched his prime minister to the French parliament, where Manuel Valls told the Germans, don't get carried away.
France's determination is total, and if we mobilize ourselves, it's not, as I heard from some, because we would be marching to Germany's tune, or from others, that we would be too lenient vis-à-vis Alexis Tsipras's government. So many contradictions when you add those criticisms. It's because it's in our interest. It's in France's interest, and our interest is Europe, and therefore it's in Europe's interest.
Read the financial press this Friday, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, and France has a lot of new friends for helping the Greeks along so that they get this proposal at least in on time before that Thursday midnight deadline.
I'm hugely admirative of the way François Hollande has been conducting the storytelling of his government achievement and his personal achievement on this one. It is absolutely, it's a thing of beauty. It is possibly the best piece of political communication he's perpetrated since he came to power. I'm pretty sure that they sent people. I'm pretty sure that the Greeks actually are not, stupid and can themselves have had representatives in Brussels for years. And I'm pretty sure that if they want to write this, they can write it themselves. But it looks very good for the French, especially for somebody who you suggested that he might be running against a far-right candidate. That is, if he sticks in the second round in the presidential election 2 years from now, that is by no means certain.
And anyhow, Hollande is really in a dilemma, because if you'd go along with Germany's Berlin's position of a tough stance on Greece, France has had so many. It has been given so much slack with the Maastricht criteria and by Brussels. It would be in a terrible position, because by then Hollande would have to apply to France the same strict stance and the deficit, the very low deficit budgets and so forth. And so the French would really suffer from austerity program. And it's not the time now to put an austerity program on just 2 years before election. But that was also a problem. You can't contradict yourself to that point. So he was obliged to do something for Greece, probably not as much as his advisors are telling us, but he's telling a story inside the country, All right,
the last thing about the last danger for Hollande is that if Greece leaves now and defaults on French debt, that's 40 billion euros that France loses right now. Yeah. Whereas if they string it along for a few years until 2017, France is still has a hope of recuperating some of that money.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about other missed deadlines. This one on Iran. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.